Howdy, thanks for joining me again on DIY with RP. Today we're working on my 2012 328i. I need to do some maintenance and some other things, like revert some things back that may be problematic on the car. So we're going to start by showing the things that need to be changed, and then I'll show you the car. We'll do a quick walk around, and I'll go through all the other cars again, like outside. We'll do a full walk around and actually talk about the things that I've done. I've had this car for almost 5 years. It's a lot of work. This was the first generation of this model, and it is it's fun when it works and not so fun when it doesn't work. But I end up doing a lot of the wrenching myself, and it ends up taking up a lot of my time. This is yet another step in that. I had an oil leak, and I don't know if there's a boost leak or whatever, but there's a lean condition on the ECU, so the check engine light stays on. I don't want to blow up the engine, so I need to fix it. So let's take a look at the car, let's take a look at the parts that need to be replaced, and then we'll set up the camera and get going. So here we go with some of the things that need to be replaced. I pulled the pipe off of the intercooler that goes from the intercooler to the turbo, and I put a metal pipe on, but I don't think it's sealing well with the turbo. There's a lot of oil residue around where it goes onto the turbo. I did purchase a new seal, but I don't know if that's going to fix it because it is really loose. So I'm just going to try this. I'm going to put this back on and see if it works or if it solves the problem. If it does, I know it's just that pipe. And that can actually cause a lean condition if you have an air leak in the system. The car makes good boost. It made better power when I had the tune on it, obviously, but I feel like that it could possibly be a boost leak. But there's only one way to find out, and that's just walking back and seeing what can be fixed and replaced or put back to solve the problem. This is not really an upgrade. I have to pull this part off because the shifter that I put in was from a 2014 car, but the park button was sticky, like somebody touched it with like some candy or something on their finger. So I need to take the shifter apart and clean it, and then I'm going to replace the sticker with this M sticker, which is fun, right? So that's a little bit of an upgrade, I guess, even though I am just replacing stuff. The rest of it is gaskets. These are intake manifold gaskets, and then the oil cooler / oil filter housing gaskets, and then new bolts that'll replace the old bolts. And this is yet another part of the walking back the lean condition. If the piping doesn't fix it, and resetting all of the adaptations and whatnot, I do need to try to put the old injectors back in, which still worked, and then I got new decouplers and seals, and I also purchased the tools that I need to install it properly, so I'm not yanking or pulling incorrectly like I did the first time. So let's take a look at the car. So it's, like I said, it's a 2012. Has been fairly reliable. I do have to periodically do maintenance on it, like maybe once a year, just do a big, something needs to be changed, and then there's other things that have to go behind it. So as far as the upgrades, I did install an engine intake when I first got it. It's got a front mount intercooler. It's got all the charge piping, so the piping that runs this way, and then from here to the turbo. And then there's also an intake pipe under there that I put in recently. It's got a Super Sprint rear section exhaust. It's got a VR Tune program on the ECU. Bilstein shocks, stock springs, drilled and I think it's drilled and slotted rotors. Yeah, from Power Stop, which the factory replacement brakes were almost $1,000 for everything I needed, and these were under $500, and they stop great. I love those brakes. Love, love, love them. But as far as the exterior goes, I'm not into like body kits and stuff like that. So the body is stock, and I kind of like the sleeper look. This car makes over 300 horsepower now, and it's nice when people just assume, oh, it's just a 328. Let me go walk this guy, and then I pull away from him. I did put the 335i steering wheel with the paddles. You can see the shifter that was replaced there. I put this little button thing in here, and the car does have Apple CarPlay that I purchased from Alibaba or something, but that works really good. Surprisingly, I think Apple lets it down because their software is really inconsistent, but that particular thing works really good. And that's about it. The interior stock as well, just window tint, and those couple of little upgrades for drivability. Here you can see the exhaust. In the trunk. And that's about it. There's some other little bits on the engine. Something I didn't mention. I do have the Go Fast Bits diverter valve. I do have some high performance or higher performance coils in there. They have a little red top on them. I don't know if you can see from there. But I'll pull that off in a minute. But as far as like maintenance stuff, God, I've been through this car so many times. The valve cover, this bottle, the wiring at the bottom of the bottle for the sensor. I did have to replace the wastegate recently. The thermostat was replaced a couple years ago. There's a vacuum pump on the back of the engine that had to be replaced. It was just stopped working, and it was blowing oil back out the back of it. It was kind of sucked. The Valvetronic actuator went out, so I had to basically pull the entire top, like not taking out the cams and stuff, but like basically the entire top of the engine, all the valve cover, everything in there before you get to the cams had to come out, and then that sensor or the actuator had to come out as well. It's just a lot of little things. Spark plugs a couple of times. Obviously the coils. I had to do the injectors recently. And it's just a lot of little things. All the things that they say would go wrong with this engine has gone wrong, with the exception of the timing chain, knock on wood. And I think that's it. But the thing that really scares me is if that timing chain goes bad. Fortunately, this is an N26, and it's supposed to be covered under some sort of a extended warranty for that sort of thing. So if it does go bad, I think the car is covered. But we'll see. If you can and you have them handy, always wear gloves. All these chemicals and things mixing and heat cycling and all of that can't be good for your skin or your health, so take care of yourself. Cover that stuff up. Now, I've already unhooked the battery, so there's no juice going to the car. I will need to unplug the ECU or the DME to get the valve or the intake manifold off, so that I can take this part off and change the gaskets that mate the oil filter housing to the head, and then I need to replace the gasket on the cooler housing as well. First thing I'm going to do is inspect around to make sure there's no new oil leaks that have popped up or any cracks in the valve cover, because a crack in the valve cover could also give that lean condition. So you just want to look around where all your bolts are, and even a fine hairline crack could be an issue. So I pressure washed this engine last week to clean the oil off of it, and now it's ready to work on. I didn't want to touch it with all that crud on it. It was disgusting. Well, the valve cover looks okay. Looks good. So now we'll just disconnect all of this and try to get it off of the engine, and then the rest of it should be pretty straightforward, I would hope. I guess we'll find out, right? Let's go. I'm going to start by loosening the DME bolts. It's 4 bolts. They're in there pretty tight, so it doesn't move around too much. And then it's just a matter of removing these connectors one at a time. They're pretty easy to remove, with the exception of one, and that'll be the last one that I take out. And now I'm going to use my trusty impact to remove the bolts that hold the intake manifold in place. It's fairly straightforward, quick and easy. There's 5 or 6 bolts, I believe, that hold the intake manifold on. You just zip them off. They're not torqued on there like crazy because the intake manifold is plastic. So you don't want to go too hard when you're removing or putting them back on. In order to move the intake manifold away from the engine, I need to loosen the charge pipe coupler, take the rubber boot off, and then I need to release the spring clip that holds the upper portion of the charge pipe onto the throttle body. So here I am doing this particular step, and then it should just pop right off, and the intake manifold should very easily just slide away from the engine. Now that I've gotten the intake manifold successfully away from the engine, I want to pull out my flashlight and inspect the valves. Obviously, since these engines are direct port, you should be able to see pretty easily how dirty or how clean they are, and that'll dictate what I do going forward, if I'm going to, pay somebody to clean them, or just leave them for a bit longer if they're not too dirty. In this particular case, they're really not that bad at all, so I wanted to go through here and just show you what they look like. So I'm looking at the valves, and since these cars are direct port injection, oil blows through the system, fuel, all that blows back through the system onto the valves, and then you end up with a lot of carbon buildup on the valves themselves. And I was concerned that maybe this car was dirty and the valves needed to be cleaned, but at 100,000 miles, they look pretty darn good. So I think I'm just gonna leave it alone. The dirtiest is cylinder 1, the valve there on the right. It looks a little mucky. The rest of them are all right. No significant buildup. So I'm gonna save that money. But yeah, so let's keep going. And now I'm going to go through the steps to remove the intake. It just gives better access to the oil cooler housing, so I don't have to, sort of struggle with getting around things. This opens up the entire front half of the engine bay. It just makes it much easier to move around and get things done. I watched the video on this on YouTube already, so what the guy did was just stuff a bunch of paper towels and things down there to catch any oil or fluids, antifreeze, coolant that came out when the housing was released. So there's a few bolts holding the housing, the front half of the housing on. I just want to get it off and take a look at the gasket, see what I'm working with. And it doesn't look too bad, but that gasket is definitely a done deal. This entire housing assembly had been leaking for a pretty long time, so I think I'm just going to remove this. I was just going to wipe it down and put it back, but I'm going to remove it and give it a thorough cleaning because the bottom is just completely covered with a caked on film of oil. It's really, really nasty, and the stuff stinks when the engine gets hot. Now that the oil cooler housing has been successfully removed, I can move on to the oil filter housing, which is held on by 3 or 4 bolts. Right now I'm working on the short one on the front left, and then there are 2 or 3 longer ones on the right side, or to my right, on that housing. One of the reasons why I had to remove the intake manifold was because one of those bolts is obstructed, so I wouldn't be able to get the housing off completely very easily without removing the intake manifold first. I got all the bolts loose and the housing is mostly free. Now I'm going to stuff some more paper towels in there to catch anything that might fall out, and I'm going to continue to remove it. But of course, since I'm clumsy, I drop my tool and I have to find my magnet so I can fish it out of there and finish pulling this thing apart. This housing has been accumulating a nice little thick film of oil for probably months or over a year. It's been heat cycled repeatedly from just driving the car daily, and is not super easy to remove, but this thicker stuff is coming off easily. So I'm just going to go through the process of removing it, then I'll pull out not a strong degreaser, but something that will finish the job for me without too much elbow grease. And now that the oil cooler housing is clean, I'll go ahead and wipe down the oil filter housing really quickly before I start putting everything back together with fresh gaskets. The first thing that I'm going to put the gaskets in will be the intake manifold. Believe it or not, those were in there pretty good. It took a lot of work to get those to break free, and some of them just fell apart on the way out. So that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take, but all the other gaskets were really easy to pull out and then replace. It took so long, and it was such a pain in the butt to do this, that I actually just sort of skipped forward and left out a lot of the process of pulling out the old gaskets, and now I'm just sort of showing myself reinstalling the fresh gaskets. It was nothing that you would want to see. It probably took me about 15 or 20 minutes. Now I'll install the new gaskets on the oil filter housing and the oil cooler. Before I finalize the intake manifold reinstall, I do want to replace the boost pipe, which is pretty straightforward. It's easy. There's just spring clips on the upper and the lower, so on the turbo and then on the intercooler, and that whole deal should come out. The pipe that's in there now is 2 parts, so I have to loosen the coupler, but for the most part it's really easy and really straightforward. So as I conclude putting the engine back together, I did want to touch on the fuel injector issue. While I didn't install the fuel injectors in this particular video, I did figure out what the lean issue was that kept popping up on the DME. So I had replaced the fuel injectors back in February of this year, 2021, and I'd gotten them from ECS Tuning. Now, they told me that they would work on my engine, so I bought them, and apparently they were not the correct fuel injectors for my engine. Specifically, they were for an N20, and my engine is an N26. So while I did get the full range of performance from the engine, I did not, the DME did not like the fuel injectors. So I had to go around online and source fuel injectors from whoever had them, and with the chip shortage and the inventory shortages for pretty much anything now, it was next to impossible to find 4 of the fuel injectors that I needed for this engine. So what I did was I installed 3 of them, and then I actually reused an old one. So after I reset all the adaptations and everything in ISTA, the check engine light went away and the engine runs perfectly. So here you see the fuel flow rates and then the injectors as they came out, and now everything is good. So like, share, subscribe, more content to come. Stay tuned. We'll see you next time.